This episode of the Creep Street Podcast is brought to you by Martini Coffee Roasters. You know, people always look at me weird when I say I start off every morning with a big old martini. But then I set them straight, and I tell them I'm talking about Martini Coffee Roasters coffee. A delicious coffee made by the Martini family. They roast their coffee using a traditional method of sight and sound to roast those little babies to perfection. And they also sell green coffee beans for those home roasters out there. And right now, fans of the Creep Street Podcast can get 20% off their entire order by using the code CREEPSTREET at martinicoffee.com. Once again, for 20% off your order, use the code CREEPSTREET at martinicoffee.com. Martini Coffee Roasters, the perfect coffee to keep you creeps caffeinated.
You've taken a wrong turn down Creep Street.
Citizens of the Milky Way, this is Maureen Bogey.
And this is Dylan Hackworth.
And this is the Creep Street Podcast. Before we get started, just really quickly, I wanted to remind everyone to please like, rate, subscribe, share, let your friends know about the podcast. We're also on social media. Please follow us. At Twitter, we're at Creep Street Pod, and Instagram, we're at Creep Street Podcast. And we also have an email address, which is creepstreetpodcast@gmail.com. So please reach out to us. Let us know what you think. Let us know if you have any theories or ideas of things that we're talking about. And also, please let us know if you have any recommendations of topics that we should cover in the future. We love hearing from you, and we're excited to dive into more creepy, weird, fun stuff.
Oh, yeah. And today we have a very creepy one.
We do. And this one really, it kind of has everything that this podcast is interested in. It's a little bit of the paranormal, maybe, some true crime, maybe a serial killer.
Absolutely. This is very much true crime, because this is a very real thing.
Yes.
But yeah, with a little bit of the paranormal mixed
a lot of
in.
question marks.
And I just want to let everyone know we will be talking about some rather graphic depictions of murder. We're not going to revel in it. We're not going to really wallow in it. But we're only going to tell you parts that are important to the story.
Right.
We're not going to linger on it and whatnot, but we will try to remember to give you a little warning before we get into some of the more gruesome aspects of this story.
That's right.
But ladies and gentlemen, this is the story of the Hinterkaifeck murder.
This story is wild.
It's creepy. This is really the story that kind of got me into this whole thing.
Yeah, totally.
It's absolutely fascinating. So
it really is.
Let me set up the scene for you.
Okay.
This all revolves around the Gruber family, who were living on Hinterkaifeck Farm, which was in a rural area outside of nearby towns in Germany.
Yes.
And this happened in 1922. So let me set up a little bit by telling you about the family.
Let's hear it.
The family patriarch was Andreas Gruber, age 63. The wife, the matriarch of the family, was Kazalia, age 72. And just so everyone knows, There's a lot of similar names. There's a few Kazalias, a few Josephs. We're gonna make sure we do a good job of indicating which one we're talking about, so you guys don't get confused and we don't get confused. And also keep in mind, this is a foreign country where there's names we probably don't pronounce right.
Right.
We're gonna do our best, but if we mess it up, please forgive us. It's not in any disrespect. It's just our lack of knowledge of the German tongue.
Exactly. And if any of our listeners happen to speak German, or if we have any German listeners, please feel free, reach out, email us, let us know what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong. We wanna improve our German.
Absolutely. So as we said, Andreas Gruber, the patriarch, 63, Kazalia, the wife, the matriarch, 72. Their daughter, who was
the matriarch was 72.
Yes, she was 72.
So she was a little older.
Yeah.
Okay. Good for you, Queen.
The eldest daughter was Victoria, age 35. She was also a widow. She had one daughter, also named Kazalia, so we'll probably refer to her as the young Kazalia.
Yeah.
She was 7 years old and was the daughter of Victoria and her deceased husband, Carl Gabriel. He died during World War I. And then she also had another son at age 2 named Joseph. And then finally, Maria Baumgartner, their maid, was 44 at the time of the murders. So let's just start off by telling you a little bit about this family.
Okay.
We know the characters. Let's find the story.
Let's do it.
The family was well off, but not really well liked around the nearby towns. And this was primarily, actually principally, because of Andreas, who was a grade A piece of shit.
We hate Andreas. He is a true fucker.
Andreas Gruber was a bastard. Andreas was known for being physically abusive and widely suspected to have an incestuous relationship with his daughter, Victoria.
Mm-hmm. He and his wife, Kazalia, actually had other children. Victoria was not an only child, but all of those children passed away, I believe, in their childhood.
Right. Victoria was the only one who survived. It's widely believed that that bastard just beat those kids to death.
Jesus Christ. Or at the very least, he neglected them. Whatever, either way, it's trash.
He's a chode. He's a grade A chode.
Yeah.
So it's also believed that Joseph was actually the product of incest between Victoria and Andreas.
Yeah.
But that is not set in stone. That is just widely rumored to be the truth.
I would say it is a rumor. Nothing has ever been proven, but I think it's a little bit more than a rumor. It seems there's some evidence that really makes that seem like that could be possible.
You're right, because Victoria went to jail for about a month under the accusations of incest, and Andreas went to jail for a year.
Yeah.
So, I mean, whether or not it's true,
it's possible that it could be untrue.
Right.
But this really seems to go beyond just small town gossip.
Yes, this seems to lend to the fact that Andreas was probably a grade A shitbag.
We fucking hate this guy.
He's a piece of shit.
Even if the incest didn't happen, he's still a garbage person.
Oh, yeah. So, as we know, Carl Gabriel, Victoria's husband, died during World War I. Now, Victoria was very well liked about town. She was noted to being very attractive.
Good for her.
And had apparently a lovely singing voice, and held a very prestigious position in her church's choir.
Okay, yes.
So she was very well liked. And she also had an ongoing relationship with a local named Lorenz Schlittenbauer. Now, this guy is going to come back in a big way.
True.
Very important part of the story. It is on record, at least, that Schlittenbauer, that he claimed to be the father of the young Joseph.
Right.
But a lot of people think that this isn't true, that maybe he was claiming Joseph in an effort to spare Victoria the shame of what might be the truth, that Joseph was actually a product of incest between her and her father.
Right.
We don't know that for sure, but yes, Lorenz did claim that the youngest Joseph was his baby that he had with Victoria.
Right. And so much so that he was giving child support money to the Gruber family for Joseph or Joseph. But a lot of people think, and I kind of do too, honestly, think that even though he was paying child support, the Grubers, Andreas specifically, was paying Lorenz the money, and then Lorenz was just giving it back to the Grubers. So Lorenz wasn't actually paying child support, but it made it seem like he was paying child support.
Exactly.
It's really murky and unclear, but either way, it's very fucked up.
Yes. So just starting off, we know there is a general just malaise about this place of fear and violence and cruelty.
Yeah.
Not a very pleasant place.
No.
But things start to officially get weird. In around October of 1921, when the family's maid suddenly up and quits over claims that the farmhouse was haunted.
And this is a big deal.
Big deal.
I want to emphasize this because quitting your job at any point in time is a big deal, and it really means that you are not willing to deal with what's happening or et cetera, whatever. But
exactly,
especially at this time, this woman felt so uncomfortable that she quit her job, and I don't know how. I can't imagine that it was super easy to just get another job,
especially with those claims. It's one thing to quit but it's weird. But it's another thing to say I quit because this place is haunted.
That's a big claim.
Yes, absolutely.
And people saw her when she left, looked very gaunt.
Because the family immediately wrote her off as insane. But the neighbors did note a very gaunt, sullen appearance upon her leaving. So indicates her experience at this house, whether it was haunted or not, was not pleasant.
It was affecting her for sure.
Later on that winter, the young daughter, Kazalia, the 7-year-old,
would complain about footsteps as well, footsteps above her in the attic. She was having trouble sleeping out of fear, and it was so bad that her school actually reported home that the young Kazalia was falling asleep during class.
She was so tired.
She was so tired. She could not sleep at night because of these strange voices and the pitter-patter of feet above her in the attic. So later on, no one believes her.
Of course.
As they do. No one believes the child, of course.
Believe your kids.
But later that winter, in late winter, so now it's 1922, in late winter, Andreas became alarmed when he noticed footprints leading from the woods to the farmhouse, but none leading back.
That is horrifying.
That is batshit crazy scary.
Right. And it's not just that, he maybe missed the footprints. It was there was snow.
Fresh powder, right. It was fresh powder. The tracks were going from the woods to the house. He searched the farmhouse and the lands all over. Could not find any. No one's there. Not long after, Andreas begins to hear footsteps in the attic as well.
Yeah.
He goes and investigates and finds nothing. Nothing in the attic. And we'll come back to that.
We sure will.
He asks his neighbors, have they seen anything weird? Nothing. Neighbors didn't notice anything weird.
Right. He told his neighbors about the footsteps. And I think that's important to note because that's just, I feel like that's such a detail that it really seems like it's something that someone just added on later to make this story seem spookier.
Right.
But no, he truly told his neighbors at the time when he was still alive that hey, there are these footsteps leading up to my house, but not out.
Yep. He asked the neighbors. They didn't see anything. So Andreas now starts to get worried.
Right.
But he's not when people offer him help, he refuses it. He doesn't want any help. Doesn't want any outside help. Doesn't want the police. Doesn't want neighbors helping him out.
Good Lord.
Then the house keys go missing. So Andreas is searching all around for these house keys.
And he's being a real dick about it.
Can't find anything. But while searching for these house keys, he notices there is a padlock to the tool shed of the farm, and there's a bunch of scratches on it, indicating someone was trying to pick that lock.
Oh my God.
So that gets him more concerned. And once again, he keeps, asking neighbors, you see anything? They don't see anything, but anytime they offer help, he refuses it.
Right. And none of the neighbors are super close. This is a farm.
Right. Also, no one likes this piece of shit.
Right, exactly. Everyone's like, fuck you.
Exactly. And then around this time, a weird newspaper shows up on the doorstep of the farmhouse, an out-of-town newspaper.
Strange.
And after inquiring with the locals, no one subscribed to this newspaper. This newspaper that's not even a local newspaper just shows up on their doorstep. No one around subscribes. That's weird.
That's just such one of those details that if that had just happened on its own, you wouldn't really think anything of it.
Exactly.
You'd be like, some weird, mistake happened.
But between the footsteps, the scratches on the lock, the keys going missing, the whole family is on edge now.
Especially since it was from a further out town where it's
exactly.
This person had to make a trip to drop off this newspaper.
Exactly. And that brings us to March 31st, 1922. The new maid, Maria Baumgartner, arrives at the farmhouse with her sister, who had accompanied her on her journey there. And after kind of meeting the family and whatnot, her sister leaves, and it is believed that Maria's sister was the last person to see the family alive.
Insane. Wild.
And that was March 31st. April 1st, 1922. Two coffee salesmen by the name of Hans and Edward Shurovsky arrive at Hinterkaifeck farm to take an order, but were surprised when no one responded. They look all over. They tap on the doors, the windows. They look around the farm. Nobody.
Right.
Don't find anyone. And the only thing they noticed as they were leaving was that the gate to the machine house was open. Other than that, nothing.
And the machine house, that's kind of just like a shed type situation.
So, or maybe
with
there's farming, like a machine. Maybe there's whatever the machine is. That
gin.
maybe. Yeah, the gin, like the old gin. Yeah, that's
it's like a machine. Point. It's like a tool shed plus.
Tool shed plus. A great way to put it. And as well, the family was noticeably absent from Sunday services. And as we know, Victoria was a sort of a staple in the church choir, so their absence was very well noticed.
Right. At the time, it was kind of a big deal to be in the church choir, and I think she was kind of a star.
She was kind of a stud.
So
yeah.
she
was a
wouldn't
pretty girl who had a hell of a voice. I mean, she was. Yeah.
She wouldn't miss church lightly.
And people would notice if she was gone.
Right.
Monday, April 3rd, the postman, Joseph Mayer, had noticed that Saturday's mail had not yet been picked up when he left Monday's mail. So that's another little thing.
And also, wasn't it true? Are you going to talk about young Kazalia?
Go ahead.
Basically, just that she was missing on Friday from school, which apparently wasn't a huge deal. They were kind of like, okay.
I must have missed that. Yes, also because the school was reporting because young Azalea had been missing from school.
Right. But then on Monday, when she still wasn't there, was when they were like, okay, this is weird.
What's going on? Right.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the postman. And then on April 4th, a Tuesday, an assembler, or a kind of a repairman named Albert Hoffner, went to the farm to repair the engine of the farm's food chopper. Upon arrival, obviously could not find the family. He knocked on the door, the windows, looked around. He waits about an hour, doesn't see anyone, so he decides, well, I'll just get to work then. He does his repairs. He said it takes about 4.5 hours.
Can you imagine, by the way, just like waiting for someone for a full hour?
I mean, that's...
Like in today's day and age, that's insane.
Well, I mean, that's just Comcast.
I guess
or
that's
your
true.
cable provider.
I guess that's true.
But anyway, but they're usually not waiting for you. You're waiting on those dipshits.
Right.
Later on that day at 2:30, the repairman met with the daughters of the village guide, Lawrence Schlittenbottom. This is the gentleman who Schlittenbauer.
Bottom
this is the
sounds fun,
gentleman
too.
in a relationship with Victoria.
Right.
He tells his daughters that the repairs were done, but then he also notes to the mayor of Wangan that there was an unsettling silence about the farm.
Right.
So, around 3:30, Schlittenbauer sends his 16-year-old son, Johann, and 9-year-old stepson, Joseph, to the farm to see
different
if they
Joseph, just to be...
Another Joseph.
Yeah.
3 Josephs so far. Sends them to the farm to see if they can make contact with the family. Obviously, they aren't able to, so they return and they tell Lorenz, could not find them.
And this is really quick, I just want to say this.
Go ahead.
This is a big deal at the time, or just in general, but especially at the time because they lived and worked there. This is their farm.
Right.
So there's really no reason for all of them to be elsewhere unless if it
Exactly.
was church or something like that. So like this is very odd that none of them are answering the door. No one's just around in the fields or anything like that. This is very, very strange.
Exactly. This prompted Schlittenbauer to return that very day with 2 other men, Michael Pohl and Jacob Siegel. And on entering the barn, they found the bodies of Andreas Gruber, his wife Cecilia, the daughter Victoria, and the young Cecilia.
So sad.
They had been murdered with a mattock, which is very similar to a pickaxe. Each had taken blows to the head. Here's just a word of caution. This part's a little graphic, but we won't linger on it. An autopsy later confirmed that the young Kazalia was alive for several hours after the attack.
Yeah.
Clumps of hair were found in her hands, indicating that she had pulled out clumps of her own hair in pain and in fear.
So terrible.
On Victoria and the elder Kazalia, there were signs of strangulation.
Right.
Which we will come back to.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Andreas, it said it was just beaten. His head was essentially goulash. It was just beaten to a damn pulp.
Well, you could even see his cheekbones.
You could see his cheekbones apparently protruding through his skin. It was really bad.
Yikes.
The bodies were stacked up on top of each other and covered in hay in the barn. And then it is believed the killer went to the house, killed Maria Baumgartner in the maid, and then finally killed the young 2-year-old Joseph in his bassinet.
And he killed them the same way with the pickaxe.
Right, with the pickaxe, with the mattock. And here's what's weird. It's believed that the Grubers were lured, the ones that were killed in the barn, were lured there one by one.
Right.
And we'll get into that in just a second. So the bodies are discovered. Mm-hmm. Inspector George Reingruber and a group of his colleagues from the Munich Police Department were then summoned to Hinterkaifeck to investigate. And from what I understand, they were kind of, very good at their job.
Yeah, and they were like the closest big city.
Right. Munich was a big city,
Kaifeck.
so, you're going to have, a lot of talent there and whatnot.
Also, really quick, just wanted to say this before. Kaifeck, I believe, I could be wrong, correct me if I'm wrong. Kaifeck was the name of the town that was closest to them, and Hinter means like near or close by or something like that. So that's how this came to be. So Munich must have been close to Kaifeck, and then Hinterkaifeck was the farm like just outside Kaifeck.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right. But the investigation was already hampered because before the investigators even arrived, the crime scene had been tramped all over. A lot of foot traffic. People had moved the bodies, had moved objects.
Right.
Whether that was out of ignorance or was premeditated, we don't know. We will talk about that in a little bit. Mm-hmm. So already they were having a hard time because of that. The autopsy was conducted the very next day, and that is how they discovered that the young Cecilia was probably alive for several hours.
God.
In the house, the maid was believed to have been killed first, and finally Joseph, which that makes sense because you'd think if you killed the baby first, the maid would hear something and would awaken the adult maid, so it would make sense she would die first and then the child. The skulls were removed and sent to Munich for further investigation, which I think I read later in World War II were lost through Allied bombing and whatnot. They believe they were lost during World War II at some time.
And I also could be wrong. I believe it seems to me, at least, that the whole sending the skull somewhere else thing seems weird to me. But I guess at the time that was like common practice.
Right.
That wasn't weird. And maybe that's still done today, and I just don't know about it. But it seems weird.
And here's the thing: they determined from the autopsy the order in which they were lured to the barn, starting with Victoria, 35-year-old, then the matriarch, the elder Kazalia, the 75-year-old, or 72, was that what it was? 72. And then Andreas,
Right.
and then finally the young Kazalia, the 7-year-old.
Oh,
And we will get into that. So at first, they thought it was robbery, that these people had been murdered during an act of robbery. They thought maybe this was vagrants that were just passing through and tried to rob them and ended up killing the family in the process. But that was very soon debunked when they found large sums of money all around the house that were very easy to find that were not taken.
Right. Like they were like quote unquote hidden, but they weren't actually hidden. You know, they were like under a bed.
Someone who wanted money could have found it.
They would have found it. Right.
So that kind of very quickly canceled that. What's even more creepy is that the house was lived in the days after the murder, until, and even indications that someone was still living there after the investigation started.
That's so fucking scary.
Livestock had been fed and milked. Meals were prepared. Chores were done. So whoever did this stayed and performed daily tasks around the farm.
Right. Right. Because and a part of that, I guess, could be seen as maybe this person who committed these murders didn't want to be found out yet, because like if the cows or the pigs had not been fed, they would have been making noise and doing things. I'm from the city. I don't know what I'm talking about. But like they would have been doing something. Well,
you're right. And the neighbors also reported that during that weekend there was smoke coming out of the chimney, meaning someone was heating the place, was cooking meals. So maybe if you don't want to draw attention, maybe that's what you do is you keep the place going for a few days.
Right. And maybe that's also true, or that probably explains
But at the same time, no one was found when the postman was there, when the repairman was there, when the coffee salesman were there. No one was found.
And not even just not answering the door. The place appeared to be
abandoned. Yeah, like there was no one there.
But maybe because the animals seemed to be tended to, and there was smoke coming out of their fireplace. Maybe that's why people didn't check on them earlier, because they were like, well, it seems like they're there. And also, people fucking hated Andreas.
Right, and people just didn't want to go there because of Andreas. So obviously, to this day, no one was ever charged with these murders. But we have some suspects.
We sure do.
And there's a lot of suspects. I think they questioned over 100 people, but we're just going to give you sort of the big suspects.
Yeah.
First and foremost, from the paranormal aspect, people believe it was ghosts, just vengeful, angry spirits. I mean, it would make sense. A bastard like Andreas is probably a magnet for evil shit.
For that negative energy.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Real piece of shit. But so that's the paranormal explanation. Was this some sort of evil spirit or spirits that had sort of laid waste to this family?
Yeah, and I think even though I know there are a lot of skeptics out there, and that's not the easiest conclusion to draw, but I do think there is something that is worth thinking about, because there are so many things about this story that don't connect and don't make sense, which we'll dive into more. But it's just like, it seems hard to believe that a person could make all of these things happen. So you know, even if you don't necessarily believe in ghosts or spirits or the paranormal, please try to keep an open mind, because this story is so hard to wrap your mind around that you gotta wonder.
Exactly. Unless there were multiple people.
And
because
which
that's
is
also
possible.
a thing. We don't know. There might have been multiple people.
Right.
The biggest suspect, the one that now obviously nothing's proven, but the one that kind of comes up the most is Lorenz Schlittenbauer. Schlittenbauer.
He was the one that was in the relationship with Victoria.
He was the one in the relationship with Victoria. Did he want this farm? I mean, because we noticed there's strangulation on Victoria, and she's believed to be the first one who went to the barn. Maybe it started off as a strangulation, but soon realized he was going to need to use
a weapon
of some kind. and then the mother, Cazalia. So Victoria, then the mother Cazalia comes out. And the only signs of strangulation were on Victoria and the elder Cazalia, which I don't know. From an outsider perspective, that would seem to, is that some sort of a sexual element to this? Like a weird power sexual element?
Maybe. Strangulation is so often linked with either crimes of passion or at least that the person who committed the murder knew the person that they were killing. It's such a personal way to kill someone.
Right.
It's such a hands-on, literally, way to kill someone. So that does lend itself to that.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Exactly. But then you would think, why would he then kill? I get why someone would kill Andreas.
And whoever killed Andreas fucking killed Andreas.
Absolutely.
You know?
His head was apparently just mush. Like they just beat him to just a pulp with this pickaxe.
Like they were beating this man past his death. It must have.
Indications show that he was probably expired well before the beating ended.
Right.
The next suspect, which is kind of interesting to think about, Carl Gabriel, the man supposedly who died in World War I, the former husband of Victoria.
That's right.
What if there's speculation? What if, because a lot of time, obviously, World War I had a huge impact on Europe. Obviously, it did us too in the States, but Europe, it was a huge thing. United States, in perspective, wasn't there nearly as long as Europe was. I mean, Europe, it was a very long, draining thing, and it was very common. People, you didn't know if someone was alive or dead.
Right. I mean, it took such a toll on America. You can only imagine how much of a toll it took on Europe.
Absolutely. And so this was not an uncommon thing. And so there's speculation, what if he returned home, found that his wife was with someone new, that she might have even had a child with her father, he loses it and kills everyone.
Right.
Very, very, it's an interesting theory. Here, though, is the wildest theory that also weirdly makes sense. As we know, there were footsteps and voices heard in the attic.
Right.
We know that Andreas went up to look, didn't see anything.
And it seems like only Andreas.
Only Andreas went up, didn't see anything.
Odd.
Well, maybe the reason why he didn't see anything out of the ordinary is because there was nothing up there that would be out of the ordinary for him. There's a lot of speculation with all this incest running around. What if there was someone up there being held captive that was like an incest child of Victoria and Andreas?
That is so tragic.
That would explain the footsteps. That would explain the voices. But that would also explain why Andreas would go up there and not see anything out of the ordinary. Well, this person's here, but I don't see anything else. Or it would explain, if no one else knew, why he would lie and say he didn't see.
Right. Maybe no one else even knew. Right.
So
there was someone up there.
There's theory that maybe if this is true, that this person broke free and killed the whole family, and then in a weird way took care of the farm animals, did a lot of the household chores.
Right.
Fascinating.
Which it's so hard because it really feels like all of these explanations are far-fetched.
Yes.
Well, not necessarily far-fetched, but all of them take a great deal of, okay, then this must have happened or this must have happened. Like,
right.
There isn't anything that really has, like, firm proof.
Exactly. And the thing to me that suggests most the paranormal is not the footsteps and the voices, the first maid leaving.
Right.
It's that somehow they were lured to the barn one by one.
I mean, what the fuck?
Okay, I get why one person would. Maybe there's a certain chore that needs to be done, and Andreas, being a piece of shit, sends his daughter out. So
right.
I get that. The first person, maybe they draw, or they make some sort of a noise that draws one person, they kill him. But then how does one after the other, then the wife, then Andreas, then the child, one by one? How does that happen? How do you lure people one by one?
It's very weird. And
without everyone just coming together.
Right.
Like after the first person goes, if I hear, we're going to come in a group, how do you get people to come one by one?
It is very weird. And the only way that I can see it making sense, and this is possible, basically, because I have read that maybe like a calf or something was let loose by this person. And so then they're like, Andreas sees that something is awry. And of course, he's a fucking asshole. So he's like, my daughter, Victoria, go figure out what's going wrong. Victoria leaves. She's out there for a little too long. They're like, this is weird. And Andreas is like, my wife, Cazalia, go figure this out.
Yeah.
Because he's a turd and won't do anything himself.
Right.
Cazalia goes and checks, and then it's a little bit too long. She doesn't come back, and then Andreas is probably like, fine, I gotta do everything myself. Blah, blah, blah. And then he goes out and then doesn't come back. And then maybe the younger Cazalia, I don't know what time this happened.
You would think the maid would go out before the child would.
But maybe this was at night. Maybe some other people were already asleep. So maybe the daughter, Cazalia, came down and was like looking for her family.
And luring a 7-year-old would probably be, because even if what's most, how did they get the adult Cazalia, the mother, and Andreas there?
Right.
The first person you get because maybe they were coming there anyway to do a chore.
Right. Or something just seemed very...
And then the young Cazalia you get because children are children. She's 7 years old. You could probably say, hey, if she poked her head up, come here.
You could just
come
ask
here,
her.
Come here. Hey, come here. I want to show you. But how do you get 3 grown-ups, one by one, to come separately?
Right. It was a big gamble to this person, I think, because even though this person had a weapon, you would think with 3 adults, even though because the older Cazalia was in her 70s and the Andreas was in his 60s, you would think the 3 of them with Victoria could maybe somewhat defend themselves against this person.
Right.
And I wouldn't be surprised if Andreas or someone had a gun too.
Exactly.
So you think that this...
it's a farmhouse. You'd think they probably would have a gun to scare off,
whatever.
Wildlife.
Or like wolves or something.
Absolutely. They absolutely would probably have a gun.
Right. So that's what makes you think, okay, whoever committed the murder wanted them to come out one by one. So that's kind of a huge gamble that they would come out one by one, but it's not impossible that they would come out one by one. It's just kind of a matter of chance. And that also, this is really sad and hard to hear, but I could also see that maybe being why the younger Azalea lived for longer, because maybe the person who committed the murder, killed Victoria first, started strangling her, and then switched over to the pickaxe, a kind of a moment of passion. Same thing with the older Cazalia, and then just totally annihilates Andreas.
Right.
And then maybe with the younger Cazalia, this murderer didn't have the heart to beat her as bad as he beat the rest. And once again, I'm assuming he beat the rest of them. And in turn ended up being a huge mistake because unfortunately and incredibly tragically, she lived longer and was able to had to endure the pain longer. But maybe that's why he didn't kill her outright. That's just kind of like my theory.
You're talking about the youngest daughter?
Yes.
My assumption is that he probably, or he or she or who or it assumed they were
true. Maybe
I don't know. Obviously, we don't know. We just know that the daughter was alive for
Totally.
several hours, and that then they went to the house, killed the maid first, which makes sense because you would probably awake the maid by killing the child first.
Oh my God, this is so grim. Oh my God.
It's just ugly. It's an ugly thing happening to. It's funny. You get why someone might say ghosts or evil spirits because of Andreas. It's no wonder he was probably a conduit for evil. He probably was a magnet for evil for such a despicable human being.
Right.
It probably drew these. And plus no one wants to help because he's a piece of shit.
Because he's like this, yeah.
Because he's a piece of shit, no one wants to help. No one wants to get more involved in this than they have to.
Yeah.
Until it's unfortunately too late.
Yeah, right. And no one this might seem obvious to some people, but maybe not, so I just want to talk about it. But there's no way that like someone else in the family committed some of these murders and then someone else in the family picked up. Like there's no way that like Andreas killed most of the people and then someone killed him of the family members that we know of.
Right.
Because it just doesn't it does not make any sense. None of those injuries could have possibly been self-inflicted.
Right.
And all of them seem to be committed by the same weapon, which is this like
Exactly.
pickaxe-like thing.
The autopsy noted the entry point was almost like triangular shape, which would have fit with the pickaxe with the mattock.
Yeah.
Mattocks, you've probably seen them. They look like a pickaxe has the point at both sides. A mattock has the point on one side and then kind of like a hoe on the back.
Yeah.
It's like a flattened. You've seen one. You've definitely seen one.
People call me that a lot.
A hoe.
Hoe in the back.
Oh, I thought they all called you mattock.
That too.
Mattock.
That's pretty cool. But yeah, and also something that's very similar, or not similar, but very interesting is the maid was covered with a sheet after she was killed.
That's the other thing, is the maid, I believe, was covered with a sheet, which would indicate a sense of, not necessarily regret, but like a sense of, I don't know if propriety is the right word, but a
Right.
sense of, most of us would do something similar. Not if we killed someone, obviously, but if we see a body, until we would want to cover it.
It's just kind of the respectful thing.
It's almost
that
respectful. If you
humans
don't know
do.
how to actually close the eyes, you probably put a sheet. It's just something we do as humans. It's a sign of
Exactly.
respect. So there clearly indicates some sort of a human instinct, even if this person was a monster, which clearly they were. It indicates some sort of a human trait.
Well, and this is something that I'm sure a lot of people are noticing is something that's very common among murderers is even if they don't necessarily feel guilty or feel regret about what they have done, oftentimes when someone kills someone they know, they cover the body because, like I said, even if they don't feel bad about it and they intended to do that, there's something about it being the person that has been killed being someone that you know.
Yeah.
That I don't know all of the psychological parts of it, but it's like you want to cover it up. So
Right.
either they can't see you can't see them. It just makes it seem more final.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It definitely denotes human intention.
And maybe guilt, but it seems like this person probably not.
Right, exactly. It's such an ugly story, but fascinating. Mm-hmm. Yeah, to this day, never solved.
Yeah. And something that I think is really important to think about with Lorenz, who is the man that had the relationship with Victoria, the daughter, the grown daughter, and seems to be kind of the number one suspect.
Yes.
He did a few things that were both weird and also things that were hard to call weird. It kind of depends on where you're coming from. So some things that I think are important to note is that before this murder happened, Lorenz had another son and he died, very
Right.
unfortunately. And after his child died, the Gruber family, who, Andreas, Victoria, this whole family, they sued him for child support or maybe more money, something like that, about Josef, the youngest son that they had. And a lot of the thought was that basically in Lorenz's mind was like, okay, Joseph isn't even actually my son. I just said that he's my son to do you guys a favor.
Right.
And now my actual son died, and because you guys want more money, all of a sudden you're coming at me, suing me for more money, like, fuck you, I'm gonna kill you all. And then
Right.
maybe I'll get Hinterkaifeck Farm.
Right.
That's a thought. And that's interesting. There is something to that, for sure, I think. But at the same time, those things could be, what's the word I'm looking for? Like secondary. Like maybe those things are true, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he would kill the whole family. Like
Exactly.
that's not
and
proof.
That's and obviously this is not to indict Lorenz, but as we know, there was clearly more intention directed at the adult women, Victoria and the elder Kazalia,
Yeah.
and Andreas.
Yeah.
The maid, I think, was just an unfortunate bystander.
Very sad.
Literally, this was the day she arrived. What a
Right.
shitty first day at the job.
And I gotta say though that I mean, of course, very shitty first day. But then that makes you think, okay, well, maybe was this person out to get the maid and just killed
And that's a
everyone
very-
else as well?
That's a very good point. Well, what if someone wanted the maid and everyone else was just collateral damage?
Yeah. I mean, that seems extreme, but
seems extreme, right? We don't. This
Maybe.
is just us speculating, but
Yeah.
but that's very possible as well. But yeah, it seems the maid was kind of this unfortunate bystander, and it seems as though the children, though they died horribly, especially Kazalia, because we know the
Oh
young
my God,
Kazalia was
so
alive.
sad.
It seems like more of the fury was directed at the adults.
right.
It's from what I understand, the young Joseph was taken out with one blow, as you would expect. He was 2 years old. It just literally, just from what I've read, just destroyed the whole crib, the bassinet.
I mean, hopefully, this sounds so
Didn't
terrible.
feel a
Hopefully
thing.
it was quick. Right,
Absolutely.
exactly.
So even though the young Kazalia did suffer, it seems as though they were not the focus. They were just unfortunate collateral,
Exactly. Oh, so terrible.
as with the maid. It seemed like the heat was more directed at Victoria, the elder Kazalia, and Andreas.
Yeah. And I gotta wonder too if maybe there's something to the fact that maybe there was just some person, some crazy person up staying in the attic that was able to hide or wasn't there at the time when Andreas checked or something like that committed these murders. That
Right.
maybe they committed these murders because they were a serial killer.
Exactly.
And at the time in 1922, serial killers weren't really a thing yet. People didn't think of that. Serial killers didn't come up
Right.
until
Not that they
later.
didn't exist.
Right,
They,
right.
They had not become part of common parlance.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. People didn't really have the the technology yet to be able to link these people, or to link these murders to be to one person.
Right.
So,
Not that there hadn't been in before. Obviously,
Absolutely.
Jack the Ripper, H.H. Holmes.
they were just harder to track and harder to
Right. It's not
to
that
nail
this
down.
concept of the serial killer did not exist. It was just it wasn't as much a part of common parlance as it is.
Exactly. So that's another thing. And also there was a woman who came out in I believe the 90s,
Yeah.
who said that I believe it was her father or someone she was related to, told her new details about the Hinterkaifeck murders. And she came forward and told the police. And then the police looked into it, and they were able to find a new, or presumably new, suspect.
Wow.
But this suspect had already died.
Yeah.
But the suspect had living relatives.
Right.
So out of respect for them, they never released the name of the suspect. And so, yeah, it's this, like, I think we might have said this before, like, this story is still used in police academies.
Yeah,
and,
they
like,
still use it as a point of study.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
yeah.
This case has never stopped fascinating people. It's a horrific and unfortunate, but
So
also
terrible.
very fascinating.
It's important to know, I think, even though it's so tragic and sad and hard to hear. It's
Right.
like, this is something that, like, truly happened and is important to know. And really quick, I just want to say, if you're out there and if you were experiencing something weird and you have a bad feeling in your gut, tell someone else about it. Get help from your friends. Get help from those around you. Use the internet. Don't just hold on to this yourself and think that you have to solve it yourself, because you don't.
Also, listen to your kids.
Listen to your kids.
If your kids say they hear something, okay, here's the thing: kids are kids. I'm sure some kids make things up, and kids
They
also
surely do.
imagine things. I get that, but never outright tell your kid they're either lying or they're wrong. Listen to your children.
At the very least, even if it isn't real, it seems real to them, and they're really upset by it, and take it seriously.
Yes, if there's something upsetting your child, whether it's real or not, listen to your child.
Please.
Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Death at Hinterkaifeck.
Oof, a big one. A good one, but a big one.
Very good, very bizarre, very unfortunate, but very good and fascinating.
Truly.
Once again, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Dylan Hackworth,
I'm Maureen Bogey.
and this is the Creep Street Podcast. Citizens of the Milky Way, good night and goodbye.